Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we wander into a forest where the trees whisper secrets and the path is not always what it seems. A girl in a crimson hood sets out on a simple journey, but the woods are watching, and something else is listening too. If you enjoy drifting into gentle stories like this one, don't forget to follow the podcast so you never miss a new tale to fall asleep to. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let the story begin. The village rested quietly beneath the slow fading light of evening, where the last warmth of the sun clung gently to the rooftops before slipping behind the distant hills. A soft hush settled over the narrow lanes, drifting through open windows and curling around chimney smoke that rose in thin, wavering lines into the cooling sky. It was the kind of quiet that felt complete, as though the day itself had exhaled and was now ready to sleep. At the edge of this village, where the final cottages gave way to fields and the fields softened into forest, there lived a young girl known for the red hood she always wore. The fabric, worn smooth with time and care, carried the faint scent of cedarwood and dried herbs, as though it had quietly absorbed the life around it. It rested lightly on her shoulders, bright even in dim light, a small and steady flame against the deepening dusk. Her home was simple and warm, filled with the quiet order of familiar things. A wooden table, polished by years of use, stood near a window that looked toward the trees. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of preserves, folded cloth, and small objects gathered over time. Everything seemed to belong exactly where it was, as though nothing had ever been hurried or misplaced. That evening, a small basket had been prepared with careful hands. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, rested bread, still carrying the memory of warmth. A jar of honey that caught what little light remained, and a bundle of herbs tied neatly with twine. These things had been chosen with intention, each one meant to bring comfort to someone who lived beyond the forest. The girl lifted the basket, feeling its gentle weight settle into her hands. It was not heavy, but it carried a quiet importance, as though it held more than its contents. There was a sense of purpose in the act of carrying it, something steady and grounding, like following a path already known. Beyond the doorway, the air had shifted. The warmth of the day lingered faintly, but beneath it lay the cool breath of the forest, patient and waiting. The path leading outward began as a soft line through grass, barely noticeable at first, before narrowing into a trail that slipped between the first trees. The forest did not begin all at once. It revealed itself gradually, as though inviting rather than enclosing. The first trees stood spaced apart, their branches high and open, allowing the last light to pass freely between them. The ground was gentle here, covered in low plants and patches of moss that softened each step. As the girl walked, her footsteps made almost no sound. The earth seemed to accept her presence easily, as though she had walked this way many times before. The basket swayed slightly with each movement, its rhythm steady and unhurried. Above, the sky continued to dim, shifting from pale gold into soft shades of blue and gray. The light filtered through the leaves, breaking into delicate patterns that moved with the breeze. Shadows stretched and shifted, never quite still, but never abrupt. Deeper along the path, the forest began to gather more closely. The trees stood nearer to one another, their trunks forming quiet columns that rose into a canopy, now thick enough to hold the fading light. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, rich and grounding. There was a stillness here, but not an empty one. It was filled with small, subtle movements, leaves brushing against one another, the faint rustle of something unseen passing through undergrowth, the distant call of a bird settling for the night. The girl moved steadily, her red hood a soft point of color among the greens and browns. At times, she paused, not from uncertainty, but from a quiet curiosity. She would linger just long enough to notice their shape, their stillness, before continuing on. The path itself began to shift as well. What had once been clear and certain now softened at its edges. In some places, it seemed to divide slightly, offering more than one way forward before gently coming together again. The ground rose and fell in small, gradual slopes, each one revealing a slightly different view of the trees ahead. Time moved differently here. It did not feel slower or faster, but less defined. Moments seemed to stretch, not in length, but in depth, as though each step carried more presence within it. It was somewhere along this deepening stretch of forest that the feeling first appeared. It was not sharp or alarming. It did not stop her steps or quicken her breath. There was no sound to confirm it, no movement to point toward, only a subtle shift, as though the forest itself had taken a gentle notice. The girl continued walking, her pace unchanged. The basket remained steady in her hands. The red hood rested softly against her back. The trees, however, seemed to grow taller. Their trunks rose more closely together now, and the canopy above thickened further, allowing only thin strands of light to reach the ground. These strands stretched long and pale, fading as they touched the forest floor. A breeze moved through, low and even, carrying with it the scent of something older. It passed between the trees and across the path, brushing lightly against her as it went. The leaves responded with a soft, collective whisper, a sound that lingered just a moment longer than expected. It was then that another presence entered the quiet. Not suddenly, and not with any clear beginning, but as though it had always been there, just beyond notice, now stepping gently into awareness. It moved with a kind of ease that matched the forest itself, neither disturbing nor fully blending in. The girl became aware of it in the same way one becomes aware of a shadow shifting slightly out of place. There was no clear form at first, only the sense of something accompanying the path from a short distance away. It kept pace, not close enough to startle, and not far enough to disappear. A steady presence, quiet and deliberate. The forest did not react. The trees remained still. The leaves continued their soft motion, and the path stretched forward as it always had. Yet something within the atmosphere had changed, as though a new layer had been added to the stillness. The girl did not stop. Instead, her attention began to drift, drawn once more to the small details around her. A patch of moss, thick and soft, spreading across a fallen log. The faint shimmer of a spider's web, suspended between two branches, catching the last traces of light. The presence remained. Gradually, it came into clearer form. A shape moving parallel to the path, weaving between the trees with careful precision. Its movements were smooth, almost fluid, as though it belonged to the spaces between things, rather than the path itself. Still, there was no sound beyond the quiet rhythm of the forest. At a certain point, the path curved gently, bending around a cluster of older trees whose roots rose slightly above the ground. As the girl followed this curve, the presence shifted as well, closing the distance just enough to be seen more clearly. A wolf. Its coat carried the deep tones of the forest, blending into shadow and bark, yet catching faint highlights where the remaining light touched it. Its eyes reflected something steady and watchful, not hurried, not wild, but attentive in a way that felt almost thoughtful. It did not approach directly. Instead, it moved alongside, maintaining a careful space, as though respecting an unspoken boundary. Its gaze remained fixed, calm, and observant. There was no sudden fear, no breaking of rhythm. The forest held its quiet, and the path remained open. The basket rested in her hands, unchanged. The wolf's presence became part of the journey. Moments passed in this quiet companionship. The path stretched onward, and the trees shifted slowly as the forest deepened further. The last light of the day faded almost completely now, leaving only a soft, dim glow filtering through the canopy. Eventually, the path reached a place where it seemed to widen slightly, opening into a small clearing. The ground here was softer, covered in low grass and scattered flowers that held a pale, silvery color in the dim light. The air felt different in this space, less enclosed, yet somehow more still. The wolf paused at the edge of the clearing. The girl stepped into it. For a moment, everything seemed to settle into perfect quiet. The trees stood motionless around the clearing, their outlines softened by the fading light. The sky above, visible through a break in the canopy, had deepened into a calm, dusky blue. In this stillness, the path ahead became less certain. Where before it had been clearly marked, now it seemed to split gently into two faint directions. One continued forward, narrow and direct, slipping quickly back into the dense forest. The other curved outward, tracing the edge of the clearing before winding into a more open stretch of trees. Both paths appeared calm. Both seemed to lead onward. The wolf remained at the edge, its presence steady. The girl lingered for a moment, her attention drawn to the flowers scattered across the clearing. Their pale shapes glowed softly in the dim light, delicate and still. Some leaned gently toward the path, as though inviting notice. She stepped toward them. The air carried a faint, sweet scent, subtle but present. The flowers, though simple, held a quiet beauty that seemed to ask for nothing more than a moment's attention. Behind her, the wolf began to move again, toward her, but along the outer edge of the clearing, following the curve of the longer path. Its movements remained smooth and unhurried, its form gradually slipping between the trees once more. The clearing held its silence. The girl remained among the flowers just a little longer, her focus drifting, her steps light and unhurried. The direct path ahead waited quietly, nearly hidden now in the dimness. The longer path curved gently away, tracing a softer, more winding route through the forest. At last, she turned, not toward the narrow path, but toward the one that curved outward. Where the trees stood a little farther apart and the forest seemed to breathe more openly. It was not a decision made with urgency, but one that felt easy, almost natural, as though guided by the quiet pull of the place itself. She stepped onto it. The ground here was softer still, covered in a mix of fallen leaves and low grass. The trees allowed more space between them, and the air carried a faint, lingering warmth despite the fading light. The path wound gently, never straight, always offering a slightly new direction with each turn. It felt less like a route and more like a wandering. Behind her, the clearing faded. Ahead, the forest stretched on, calm and endless. And somewhere beyond sight, moving swiftly and silently through the deeper shadows, the wolf continued on a different path, one that led straight through the heart of the woods. The girl walked on, her red hood a quiet glow in the dimming forest. the basket steady in her hands, the night gathering softly around her. The trees closed in once more, and the path carried her forward, deeper into the pines, where the air grew cooler and the silence grew fuller, and the story, though still gentle, had begun to change. Beyond the quiet clearing, where the path had divided and gently curved away from certainty, the forest deepened into something older and more watchful. The trees no longer stood with open space between them, but instead gathered close, their trunks rising like pillars that had stood undisturbed for countless seasons. Their branches stretched overhead in a woven canopy, softening what little light remained until the world beneath them seemed suspended in a dim and steady twilight. Far ahead, where the narrower path cut more directly through the woods, the forest gave way to a small and secluded opening. It was a place that felt untouched by passing time, where the air rested heavily and the ground lay still beneath a covering of pale grass and fallen leaves. At the center of this quiet space stood a small cottage, its wooden frame softened by age, its roof sloping gently beneath a layer of moss that had settled there over many years. The cottage did not announce itself. It did not stand out sharply against the forest, nor did it resist the encroaching stillness around it. Instead, it seemed to belong to the clearing in a quiet and patient way, as though it had grown there rather than being built. Its windows reflected no light, and its door rested slightly uneven within its frame, as though it had been opened and closed so many times that it had simply learned to settle into stillness. The air around the cottage held a particular calm, one that felt deeper than silence alone. It carried no movement of wind, no rustling of leaves, and no distant calls of evening creatures. It was a stillness that pressed gently against everything within it. Within this quiet, the presence that had moved through the forest with such smooth and deliberate motion arrived without sound. It did not break the stillness, nor did it disrupt the delicate balance of the clearing. Instead, it seemed to fold into it, becoming part of the quiet in a way that was both natural and unseen. The door of the cottage shifted slightly, its movement subtle and slow, as though guided by something careful and unhurried. The stillness within the clearing remained unchanged, even as the threshold between inside and outside was quietly crossed. Time passed in a way that was difficult to measure. The forest beyond the clearing continued its slow descent into night, and the dim light beneath the canopy softened further into shades of deep blue and gray. The cottage remained where it had always been, its presence steady and unmoving, as though nothing within it had changed. Deeper within the forest, along the longer and more winding path, the girl continued her journey. The ground beneath her feet was softer now, layered with fallen leaves that shifted gently with each step. The air carried a faint coolness that brushed against her skin. Steady and even, like a quiet reminder that night was approaching. Her pace remained unhurried, guided more by the gentle rhythm of the forest than by any urgency of destination. The basket rested securely in her hands, its weight unchanged, its contents still wrapped and waiting. The red hood lay softly across her shoulders, its color now dimmed by the fading light, yet still present as a quiet point of warmth against the deepening shadows. The path she followed did not lead directly forward. It curved and wandered, looping gently through clusters of trees and across small rises in the land. At times, it seemed to disappear entirely, only to reappear a few steps later as though it had simply been waiting to be noticed again. Around her, the forest revealed small details that might have gone unseen in brighter light. The pale trunks of birch trees stood out faintly among darker pines, their surfaces catching what little light filtered through above. Patches of moss glowed softly along the ground, their texture thick and quiet beneath fallen branches. A narrow stream, nearly hidden among the roots of trees, reflected a dim shimmer as it moved slowly through the earth. The girl paused beside this stream for a brief moment, her attention drawn to the way the water moved without sound, slipping over stones and beneath low branches. It carried no urgency, no disturbance, only a steady and continuous flow that seemed to mirror the passage of time itself. When she continued, the forest seemed to deepen further. The trees grew taller, their branches reaching higher into the unseen sky, and the path narrowed once more, guiding her between trunks that stood close and still. The air here felt thicker, filled with the quiet presence of things that had long existed without change. The earlier sense of being observed had not disappeared. Instead, it had settled into the background of the journey, no longer new, but no less present. It lingered gently, like a distant awareness that neither demanded attention nor fully faded away. As the path curved again, the forest began to shift in subtle ways. The ground grew more level, and the density of trees eased just slightly, allowing a faint openness to return. The air carried a different scent now, one that hinted at something familiar, though it remained just beyond clear recognition. In the distance, through the spaces between the trees, there appeared the faint outline of a clearing. It was not immediately distinct, but it suggested a break in the forest's continuity, a place where the path might finally lead somewhere more defined. The girl moved toward it, her steps steady, her attention quiet and observant. The basket remained in her hands, its presence constant, grounding her movement as the forest slowly gave way. When she reached the edge of the clearing, the cottage stood before her. It appeared exactly as it had always been, unchanged by the passage of time or the deepening of night. Its small windows reflected the dim light of the sky, and its door remained slightly ajar, as though it had been left that way without thought or intention. The clearing itself felt still, its silence deeper than that of the surrounding forest. The grass lay undisturbed, and the air carried no movement. Even the faint sounds that had accompanied the forest journey seemed to have faded here, leaving only a quiet that felt complete and unbroken. The girl stepped forward, crossing into the clearing with the same unhurried calm that had guided her through the woods. The ground beneath her feet softened, and the air felt slightly warmer, though no clear source of that warmth could be seen. As she approached the cottage, small details began to emerge. The wood of the walls bore the marks of time, its surface worn smooth in some places and rough in others. The roof sagged slightly at one corner, where moss had gathered thickly, blending the structure further into its surroundings. The door, resting slightly open, revealed only darkness within. It was not a deep or heavy darkness, but a soft one, like the dimness of a room that had not yet been touched by light. It seemed to invite entry without urgency, offering no resistance and no clear signal of what lay beyond. The girl paused at the threshold, her attention drawn to the quiet that filled the space. It was not the same as the stillness of the clearing, nor the gentle presence of the forest. It was something more enclosed, more contained, as though the air itself had settled and chosen not to move. She stepped inside. The interior of the cottage was simple, shaped by the same quiet care that had defined it from the outside. A small table stood near one wall, its surface clear except for a folded cloth. A chair rested beside it, slightly angled as though it had last been used without concern for exact placement. Along another wall, a bed sat beneath a narrow window, its frame wooden, its coverings pulled up neatly. The fabric lay smooth and undisturbed, its surface catching faint light that filtered through the glass. The room held a warmth that felt familiar, yet something within it seemed slightly altered. It was not a visible change, nor something that could be easily named. Instead, it existed in the way the air felt, in the way the silence settled just a little more heavily than expected. The girl moved slowly across the floor, her steps quiet against the wood. The basket remained in her hands, its presence steady and unchanged. The red hood rested softly around her, its color now dim within the low light of the room. As she drew closer to the bed, the stillness deepened. The shape beneath the coverings remained motionless, its outline softened by layers of fabric. The light from the window fell gently across it, revealing only faint details, never enough to fully define what lay beneath. There was something in the air that suggested familiarity, yet it felt distant, as though separated by something unseen. The room held its quiet, and the girl remained within it, her presence steady, her movement unhurried. The moment stretched. The stillness did not break, but it shifted slightly, as though something within it had become aware of her presence. It was not a sudden change, nor one that carried urgency. Instead, it was a gradual unfolding, like the slow turning of a page that revealed something already there. The shape on the bed seemed to settle differently beneath the coverings, its outline adjusting in a way that was subtle yet noticeable. The light from the window shifted slightly as the sky outside deepened further into night, casting longer, softer shadows across the room. The girl remained where she stood, her attention drawn fully to the quiet before her. The sense of something being not quite as expected began to form, not as a clear realization, but as a gentle awareness that settled slowly into place. It did not bring fear, nor did it disturb the calm of the moment. Instead, it existed alongside it, like a quiet question that did not yet seek an answer. The air grew heavier, though no movement could be seen. The silence deepened, though no sound had been present to begin with. And within that stillness, the moment continued to unfold, slow and steady, as though time itself had chosen to linger there, holding everything in a quiet and delicate balance, just before something unseen would finally reveal itself. The stillness within the cottage lingered, stretched thin across the room like a veil that had settled gently and refused to lift. Nothing moved with urgency, and nothing broke the calm that had formed. Yet something within that quiet had shifted. It was not the kind of change that could be seen at once, nor something that announced itself. Instead, it existed as a subtle easing, as though the weight of the moment had begun, slowly and almost imperceptibly, to loosen its hold. Outside, the forest had fully entered the night. The last traces of dusk had faded, leaving only a soft, diffused darkness that rested evenly across the trees and the clearing. The air had cooled, carrying a steady calm that moved without sound between the trunks and along the forest floor. The path that led to the cottage lay quiet and undisturbed, its surface marked only by the faint impressions of earlier steps. Within the cottage, the dim light from the narrow window softened further as the sky deepened. Shapes within the room grew less defined, their edges blending into one another until everything seemed part of the same gentle shadow. The bed, the table, the chair, and the walls themselves all settled into a shared stillness, as though they had always existed this way. Time passed without measure. The quiet that had filled the room began to shift once more, not in a sudden or forceful way, but with the same slow and patient motion that had guided everything before it. The air, which had felt heavy and enclosed, seemed to loosen, allowing space to return between one moment and the next. The shape upon the bed no longer held the same stillness it once had. The coverings, which had rested smooth and unmoving, showed the faintest suggestion of change, as though something beneath them had stirred, not in resistance, but in quiet release. It was not an abrupt motion, but a gradual one, unfolding with the same softness that had defined the night itself. The presence that had filled the room began to withdraw. It did not vanish all at once, nor did it retreat in any visible direction. Instead, it seemed to dissolve into the quiet, becoming less distinct, less defined, until it was no longer something that could be sensed in the same way. The air cleared, not completely, but enough to allow a different kind of stillness to take its place. Outside, at the edge of the clearing, another presence entered the space. It moved with a different rhythm than the one that had come before. Its steps, though careful, carried a quiet weight, grounding themselves in the earth with each motion. It did not slip between shadows, nor did it blend into the forest. Instead, it passed through the clearing as something wholly part of the world around it, neither hidden nor revealed, simply present. The figure approached the cottage without haste, pausing briefly as though to take in the stillness that surrounded it. The door, still resting slightly open, allowed entry without resistance, and the threshold was crossed with the same calm deliberation that had guided each step. Inside, the room remained dim and quiet. The air no longer held the same weight as before, though it had not yet fully lightened. It existed somewhere between what had been and what was becoming, suspended gently without being seen. The figure moved slowly across the room, its presence steady and grounded. There was no urgency in its motion, no sharpness to disturb the calm. Instead, it carried a quiet purpose, one that seemed to belong naturally within the unfolding of the moment. The bed, still resting beneath the narrow window, remained the center of that quiet space. The coverings, once smooth and still, now held the faintest suggestion of movement beneath them, as though something long held in silence had begun to return to itself. The air shifted again. It was a subtle change, one that moved like a soft current through the room, lifting the stillness just enough to allow breath and presence to flow more freely. The silence remained, but it no longer pressed as heavily as before. It had softened, becoming something gentler, something that allowed rather than held. Time continued to pass. The room, once suspended in a quiet tension, began to settle into a different kind of calm. The shapes within it regained a faint sense of separation, their outlines returning softly as the night outside reached its deepest point. Beyond the cottage, the forest remained steady and unchanged. The trees stood tall and unmoving, their branches resting beneath the quiet sky. The path that wound through them lay undisturbed, waiting as it always had, patient and open. Within the room, the stillness gave way to a sense of quiet restoration. The presence that had once filled the space was no longer there, and in its absence, something else had taken its place. It was not a single thing, but a feeling, a gentle return to balance, as though the room itself had exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. The figure that had entered the cottage remained only briefly. Its purpose, whatever it had been, did not require lingering. With the same calm and steady motion, it moved once more toward the doorway, passing through it without disturbance. The door remained as it had been, slightly open, offering no barrier between inside and out. The clearing beyond lay quiet. The night air carried a faint coolness, brushing softly against the ground and the walls of the cottage. The grass remained still, and the trees stood as silent witnesses to everything that had passed and everything that would follow. Within the cottage, the room continued to settle. The bed beneath the window now held a different stillness, one that felt natural and at ease. The coverings rested gently, their surface no longer marked by tension, but by a quiet completeness. The air moved softly, carrying with it the faint warmth that had once seemed distant. The girl's presence within the room had not vanished, but changed. Where there had once been a quiet uncertainty, there was now a gentle calm. It was not the same as before the journey, nor was it something entirely new. Instead, it felt like a continuation, a soft unfolding of something that had always been there, now more fully understood without needing to be named. The basket, still resting nearby, remained untouched, its contents preserved within their careful wrapping. It seemed almost as though it had been waiting, patient and still, for the moment when it would once again become part of the world beyond the quiet. Outside, the first hint of change began to touch the sky. It was not yet dawn, but the deep darkness of night had begun to ease, giving way to a softer shade that suggested the coming of light. The forest responded in kind, its stillness shifting slightly, allowing the faintest suggestion of movement to return. Within the cottage, that same gentle change began to take hold. The air grew lighter, and the quiet that remained no longer felt heavy or enclosed. It had become something open, something that allowed space for breath, for movement, for the slow return of the world beyond the moment. Time moved forward. The room, the clearing, and the forest beyond all followed that same quiet progression, each one shifting in its own way, yet all guided by the same steady rhythm. The night, which had once seemed endless, now carried within it the promise of something new. Dena. The first light of morning began to touch the edges of the sky. The cottage stood unchanged in form, yet altered in feeling. It no longer held the same stillness, something that belonged to the quiet beginning of a new day. The path leading of the clearing lay open. It curved gently back through the forest, tracing the same route that had been taken before. Yet now it seemed different. The trees, though unchanged, felt less close. The air, though still cool, carried a faint warmth beneath it. The forest itself seemed to breathe more freely, as though it too had moved through something unseen. The girl stepped once more onto that path. Her movement was as calm as it had always been, her pace steady and unhurried. The red hood rested softly around her shoulders, its color now touched by the first light of morning, returning it to a gentle brightness. The basket rested in her hands, its presence once again part of the journey. It no longer felt as though it carried something waiting, but something complete, something that had found its place within the quiet unfolding of the story. The forest guided her forward. Each step followed the next with the same gentle rhythm, the path leading her through the trees, across the soft ground, and back toward the edge where the village waited. The journey did not rush, nor did it linger. It moved as it always had, steady and certain in its quiet way. As the light grew stronger, the forest began to reveal its details once more. The leaves caught the brightness of morning. The moss glowed softly along the ground, and the distant sound of waking birds returned, faint and gentle. The path widened, the trees thinned, and at last the forest gave way to the open fields beyond. The village lay ahead, resting in the soft light of early day. Its rooftops caught the first warmth of the sun, and the quiet that had filled it the night before now shifted into the gentle movement of morning. The girl continued forward. Her steps carried her across the familiar ground, past the places she had known before, and back toward the home where the quiet of evening would one day return again. Behind her, the forest remained. It stood as it always had, tall and still, holding within it the memory of the path, the clearing, and the quiet unfolding that had taken place beneath its branches. It did not call out, nor did it follow. It simply remained patient and unchanged, as though it would always be there, waiting for the next story to pass through its silent and watchful depths. And as the day began, soft and unhurried, the journey came to rest, not with an ending, but with a quiet continuation, like a breath that had been taken in and gently, peacefully released.